Welcome again, everybody, to this public talk of the spiritual school of the Golden Rosycross. Um, it's very important to say that the school is actually a school. The school is not a religion, it's not a cult, it's not a sect. We respect all this kind of work, but we position ourselves as a school because in this organization, in the school, everybody that joins it, since the very first day until the end of his or her life, will be called a pupil. So nobody's called a master here. Because in a spiritual school, the only true master that you recognize is the Spirit. And the Spirit is not an external entity, it's not an external God, it's not someone, it's not an external master. The Spirit is the universal principle, the universal particle that is in the very heart of every human being. And the person that finds this true master will be able to go through a true revolution, a true self-revolution. Okay. So that's why we call ourselves a school, and a spiritual school, because the only master that this school recognizes is the Spirit itself. As you can tell by now, certainly, I'm not a native speaker of English, so I have to apologize to you, right? Since the outset, because you're going to bear with my accent and certainly with the many mistakes that I'm going to commit. Okay, so I'm apologizing up front and counting on your kindness, and also hoping that if we are able to speak from our hearts, that you can also understand with your heart, and from heart to heart, we normally can overcome many barriers, right? We hope we can overcome that one too. Well, what is the objective of these public talks from the spiritual school? The spiritual school, dear friends, is not going to bring you anything new, because the universal knowledge, the universal teaching, that is the sum of the true knowledge that is present in all cultures, all times, in all nations, in all esoteric traditions, that sum belongs to mankind, and it doesn't belong to anybody. And the objective of the spiritual school is to bring a synthesis of that knowledge in a way that we can not learn it as an additional external knowledge. Welcome in any place, please. Not to learn it as an external knowledge to accumulate additional theoretical knowledge, but to go through a process of recognition. Because the true knowledge, as it belongs to mankind, it is also present in principle. Even if it is only as a tiny principle in each one of us. And if that principle is awakened, we can recognize that knowledge based on our own experience, based on our own intuition, based on our own reality. So the objective of the spiritual school is to bring this knowledge and the fundamental pillars of this universal knowledge. And one of the fundamental pillars of the universal teaching or the universal knowledge is actually self-knowledge. And self-knowledge, as it is stated in this so famous sentence that we have utilized as the theme or the title of this public talk, know yourself. Right? It is the motto of the temple of Delphi in Greece, or Delphi, right? Some people say Delphos. Right? And the whole sentence, certainly I'll not be able to quote it all. I'll try to quote as much as I can remember, right? It says something like this: know yourself, and you will know the gods, and the universe. So this formula, this sentence indicates a knowledge that is based on 3 different levels. Know yourself, your whole being, your true self. And based on that true first-hand self-knowledge, not an acquired external theoretical knowledge, but the true source of inner self-knowledge. Based on that, you will be able, or anyone should be able to, know the gods. So it's not God or an external God or a God of a religion. Here, gods are meant as the powers of nature, the forces of nature. Actually, the forces of nature that drive our consciousness and our lives. And that actually, make us behave one way or another way, and that we don't understand those forces, and we are forced to behave that way or another way. But with the true self-knowledge, it is said in the sentence, or at least suggested in the sentence, that we will be able to understand those forces, the gods, right, as it is mentioned. And the third level in that sentence indicates that the person or the human being that knows himself or herself, that is able to understand the forces of nature that drive his or her consciousness and behavior, will also be able to understand the universe or the entire cycle of life. The Rosicrucians, the classic Rosicrucians of the 17th and 16th century, they would indicate this knowledge as the ability of reading 2 books, only 2 books. They said that the library of a Rosicrucian, a true Rosicrucian, was comprised of 2 books, and with those 2 books they could read all the other books, or understand all the other books. The first book was the book T. And here, the book T means the book of Theos or Theon. That is the Greek word for God. Not an external God, but again, this universal principle, the Spirit. And to read that meant that a human consciousness that was able to connect itself truly with that principle would then be able to read the second book, the book M, or the Librum Mundi, or the book of nature. So by deciphering the mysteries of your own consciousness, you would be able to understand the mysteries of all nature and the universe. Again, the same sentence said in a different way. Okay. And if we wanted now to really begin with the discussion of our theme, and after that short presentation or discussion, we are going to have a session of questions and answers that we'll try to answer within our limits, of course. But if we really begin with the theme, and if we are talking about self-knowledge, we'd like to start with a very intriguing question, almost like a provocative question, right? If we are talking about self-knowledge, shouldn't we begin by asking you hypothetically, who are you? Who are you? Well, to try to answer that question, most people will begin by their name, right? I'm such and such. But that's not yourself, that's your name. Well, if that doesn't work, then eventually you would say, well, I was born here, I lived there, etc. But that's just your address or the place of your birth. And especially in a place like New York, for example, such an international place, we have a microcosm of the world here. So what truly defines us is not where we were born, but what binds us here. Especially in such a sunny afternoon that we could be doing anything else, but we are seeking for something, right? So certainly it's not the place where you're born or where you live. Eventually, you could migrate your strategy to try to answer that question by describing your ideas, your thoughts, saying, well, I think this, I believe that, etc. But those are your thoughts and your beliefs. And many of them, if you truly pay attention to them, you're going to realize that they are not truly yours. That they came in through, either the media or some books or some friends. They are nice thoughts, but they're not necessarily yours, and they're not necessarily you. And the same happens to your emotions. The same happens to your reactions. And after all that, we are really running thin in terms of options of trying to define ourselves. Then we are going to attach ourselves to our bodies and say, well, I am this body, right? I am this identity that, wakes up in the morning and looks at myself, or himself, herself in the mirror, and says, this is me. But if you truly believed that you were your body, would you be here today? Seeking for something that is, like a flame in your heart and in your mind, telling you that the reality of your being must be something way beyond this. If we truly believe that our bodies would define our existence, probably we would be trying to maximize our biological existence at this very moment. And it's not the case. So, when we really reach that point, we are starting to realize that this self, this true self, this your self, must be beyond the veil of your consciousness, or at least your perception. We know intuitively that it's closer to us than our own heart, but we cannot grasp it, we cannot touch it, we cannot define it. This true self, this true being, that is the underlying reality of our existence, was defined with different names by different traditions in the past. But in essence, they meant always the same thing. So in old India, for example, it was defined as Atman. In Egypt, and even in China, it was defined as the lotus flower. The flower that blossoms out of our, sometimes so hard and complicated reality. The Rosicrucians of the past would define this being, and promise not to disarrange everything with just this one. They would define it as a rose. And it's important to understand what they define it as a rose. Especially if you look at a rose this way. Because then you realize that this means the true vortex of energy that is there, even when you only have a rose bud. And all the petals are, almost hidden in it, right? As the dimensions of existence that are all there, but they're not manifested yet. So this principle, the Rosicrucians would say, that is like a rosebud that must blossom in our hearts. And then the objective of the life of a Rosicrucian would be then to unite the reality of life, that is the cross, that is us. It's not, a place where someone was nailed to. It is the human reality. And to unite the human reality with the universal principle arose, and then go through this absolute revolution. Quoting another tradition, the Christian tradition, not as a religious source, but as a symbolic source, because all the language of the gospel is just like the language of the Mahabharata, is the language of the Odyssey. All that language is a symbolic language and describes this inner process. So we are not quoting a religious source, we are quoting a symbolic source. In this symbolic source, this principle was defined as the mustard seed. Probably because at that time, the mustard seed was eventually the tiniest thing known by the human being. A mustard seed is really a tiny seed. And it was said that if a person or a consciousness could connect itself to this source, and that is the meaning of having the faith of the size of a mustard seed. It doesn't mean that you must believe in dogma. It means that your consciousness should be able to connect itself to the absolute source that it already lies in it. And if that happens, then this consciousness should be able to move and transform the mountains of its inner world. The modern school of the Golden Rosycross that was founded approximately 100 years ago, give or take, 5 years, tried to define this principle by using the tiniest known thing at that time, that it was an atom. So that's why in the literature of the school, that principle, that true self, is described as the spirit spark atom. Today, if we were to describe or to name it again, certainly we would not choose an atom, we would call it a particle or even a singularity, always pointing to the very limit of the human consciousness. Right? And eventually one of the most beautiful descriptions of all times of this true self in us was given by Hermes Trismegistus. This very famous wise of the Greek period in Egypt. And he described this principle by describing God itself. But not an external God, but this true self that lies in us. And Hermes said, God, or this principle, and I may not quote perfectly Hermes, and I apologize also to Hermes Trismegistus. So, God is a boundless sphere, which center is everywhere, and which limits or circumference, right, is everywhere and nowhere, because it has no limits. This is the description of the two creating forces of the Spirit, of the Father, Mother, of the original Holy Trinity of the past, or the two creating forces of the universe, ideation and manifestation. But it's also the description of this true self in us that was called by the Rosicrucians of the 17th century, especially in England, especially by Robert Flood, the microcosm. And they would indicate that we live in this big, complex system that is the microcosm, the human microcosm, that is almost like a cell of the original universe. So we live in this cell of the original universe. That is the true self of the human existence. But there is a veil, there is a limit between ourselves and this true self. And now we would like to describe a little bit what that veil is made of. Because that is also related to the second piece of that formula of the Temple of Delphi. That says, know yourself, self, yourself, your true self. So this is the very beginning. This is the cornerstone of everything. And then you will be able to know the gods. In other words, the powers of nature that operate in you, that work in you, that create your consciousness and your state of life. And then you will be able to understand the whole cycle of life, or the whole universe. So, now that we briefly touched on this first principle, we'd like to move to the second one. Okay? To move this thing so that we place it here. Let's see if it's going to work. Okay. By the way, it is such a, of course it is deep, but it's such a simple image that if you cannot see it, at least you can imagine it, right? Well, the drawing gets worse, okay? So, and we are going to talk about ourselves now. But this is going to look so ugly that I don't dare say that this is yourself. This is myself. Okay? So this is the classic representation of a human being. Okay? And this is so it's me. Okay? Right. This represents very, very simply, very basically, our physical body. The first thing that we know, the first definition of myself, yourself, that we can use, as we were, joking a little bit earlier. This is already a marvel of nature. The amount of systems in full coordination and, in synchronicity, working here, from your nervous system, from your glands, your blood, your lungs, all your organs, your muscles, your skeleton, everything. This is already a marvel of nature. This is a masterpiece of nature. But what is amazing is that this is not everything that we are, at least in this manifestation. Okay? Because the universal teaching explains to us that we have at least a second body. Not only the physical body, but the second body. A body that is like, a layer of energy that is around and at the same time inside the physical body, that is known as the etheric body or ethereal body. The scientists have already proved the existence of this body through the photographs of the aura, right? Children see this body very, very often. And sometimes they can tell, the humor of their parents or their family or teachers, right? Just by looking at this and seeing the different colors, right? But, it's important to say that this body has two layers. The more dense layer is just like an energetic mirror, exact mirror of every single organ and system of the physical body. That is the lower etheric body and the more dense body. That's what That's the body that most people see. Okay, because it's very close to the vibration of the physical body. But this etheric body has a second layer. And the second layer actually is made of force lines, or power lines. Just like those Chinese medicine charts. If you've seen that once, all those meridians with the energy nodes, right? Those are the power lines that actually vivify the etheric image of the organs, and that in turn vivify and maintain alive the physical organs of the physical body. So, just like the physical body, the etheric body has its organs, made of an image of the physical body and the power lines and energy nodes. But we also have a third body, a body that is made almost by, personal, self-aware energy. That is emotional energy. That is the astral energy or astral body. That looks like, a cloud of energy that sometimes can take the shape of the physical body and sometimes not. And it's also a very old body. It has been developed, in previous periods of existence. So it has its own organs as well. And you probably know the name of the organs of the astral body with a different name that eventually you might have related to that or not. But it's very known as chakras, right? So the chakras are, in Sanskrit, they mean wheels, right? And they correspond to the organs of the astral body. Because the organs of a body made of energy are actually vortexes of energy, right? So we have countless chakras around our astral body. But just like, the physical body, we have tiny little organs, but we have main important organs. We have 7 main important organs or chakras in our astral body. So the first one is obviously, the crown chakra over and above the pineal gland in our brain. And it corresponds to the pineal gland. The second one is here. It is also known as the third eye, and it corresponds to the hypophysis, right? That is in the middle of the brain. The third one is placed right here in our larynx, and it corresponds to our voice. That is also our superior creating power. That is the power that gives a body and energy to our thoughts and transform our thoughts into elementals of nature through the creating power of our voice. We have our heart chakra that is right in the middle of the crossroads of our existence. So, it is in the crossroads of all the energy nodes and energy cycles and waves that circulate in and out of our astral body and the other bodies as well. We have the solar plexus located here that also corresponds to our biological brain. Just like we have a brain here, we have the mirror of a brain here. And it's made of our liver and spleen and the pancreatic system that also drives our level of energy, right? And level of vitality. We have the pelvic chakra that corresponds to our creative, organic, and biological power, the power to create life. And then the root chakra, that is under the end of the spine, and that links us with all the karma of mankind and all the heritage of all humanity. So that's the astral body. That is a very complex and well-developed body. And then we have the fourth body that is actually, developed just into its first half. That is the mental body. And we say the first half because we have developed truly only the concrete mind, not the superior mind. And this mind here, or this mental body, as the younger one, doesn't have its own organs developed yet. That's why it is such a volatile body, because sometimes our thoughts are dominated by the mental images in our minds. Sometimes our thoughts are dominated by the astral currents of our emotions. And sometimes our thoughts are dominated by our biological or karmic reactions. That is why we really don't think we are thought by images, astral situations, and biological or karmic reactions. On the top of that, we could define this as, the fourfold chariot, like, Ouspensky or Gurdjieff would define it, right? We have a pilot to this chariot. That is our consciousness. And our consciousness, or the human consciousness, has also been symbolically called the human soul in the past. So in all the ancient traditions, when you hear about the soul, it's an indication of the human consciousness. And the human consciousness is a very complex system as well, because it's not located in one single place. The human consciousness has at least 3 levels in us. Levels that have been also defined in psychology. And the universal teaching place those 3 levels of awareness or consciousness, or 3 centers of consciousness in our heart, calling it the center of our identity. In our head, as the center of our awareness. And in our biological sanctuary, the universal teaching sees the human being as a 3-fold sanctuary, actually. Right? So, this piece is the center of our manifestation or action. In psychology, you see this as the conscious, subconscious, and unconscious, right? And if you were to describe the situation of this pilot, the human consciousness, that is not linked with the true self, with the true center of awareness of the microcosm, but lives in our current state of consciousness in life, in isolation from it. This pilot is pretty much like that person that is sitting on an iceberg. Here. This is the tip of the iceberg, right? The waters are here. And this is the big, big part that is below the water, right? And our consciousness, our awareness, and we are normally very proud of the control we have over our lives, don't you? Mm-hmm. Aren't we proud of it? And we are more or less like that person sitting on that top of the iceberg with a paddle, right, in his or her hands. You know, firmly determining the course of his or her life, saying, I'm going this way. Huh? But the undercurrents that truly drive your life are telling you something different. And it's not a coincidence why we in our, in the reality of our lives are more or less like that person saying, I'm going in that direction. Certainly. I plan to do this. I do the exact opposite. Why? Because we try to control this whole system through the younger body, the mental body. And compared to the other ones, the mental body, the youngest brother, is just like a tiny little mice in comparison to the older brother, just to begin with. That is the astral body, that would be a lion, right? And the astral body is connected with all the karma and all the biological heritage. And everything that is under the water is actually determining what we are going to do and how we are going to react. And that's why we live such, an incoherent life. Because the center of our awareness, our threefold consciousness, is separated from the original principle in our microcosm, from the rose of the heart, from the spirit spark atom, from the lotus flower, from the mustard seed. And we try to drive the chariot, the fourfold chariot of our lives. And actually our lives become totally out of control. So those are the gods. Those are the forces of nature that we actually don't know until we know our true self. Because we may try to control ourselves with methods, with exercises, with practices, trying to get smarter, trying to get better, trying to get faster, trying to awaken hidden senses. We can do all that. But dear friends, in essence what we are doing, we are just training this system more and more and more in its separation from the true self that already is in us. And until we understand that from that standpoint and not from this standpoint, trying to make this better, or trying to fly out of the labyrinth of life, just like Icarus tried to do, by mending pieces of this, like the feathers, and putting them together with some thoughts or idealism, or that is the wax. But the closer we get to the true sun, the faster they melt. And the faster we are back to our true reality in the labyrinth of our lives. So there must be something different. And if we understand then the powers of nature, or the quote-unquote symbolically speaking, using the Greek symbol, the gods, right? Then we can understand the universe, or the true cycle of existence, the true cycle of life. So, bear with us for a moment. Another very important aspect of the universal teaching is that it explains to us that this cycle of life, that we may know, for example, as the cycle of incarnations and reincarnations, as the wheel of life and death, or birth and death, or as the wheel of samsara, or any other name, that the being or the self that is bound to that wheel is not this one. It's not you or me. Because we are a construction of time and space. And we live only once in time and space. In the ocean of life, we are just like a wave. The ocean is eternal, and it's always the same. But the waves are they live only once. That wave that you see once is never going to come again. It is unique, but at the same time, it exists only once and during a very short period of time. Why? Because it reflects the movement of the sea, or reflects the state of life and consciousness of the sea. So in the sea of life, you have the waves. And that cycle, where is it now? Here. So that cycle that could almost be defined as, by the four seasons of a year, right? They begin with an empty microcosm. They begin with the true self without any manifestation. Why? Because the human soul, not being connected with it, is going to vanish with the vehicles that it is attached to. Symbolically speaking, that's the meaning of the quote-unquote mortal soul, or the soul that lives only once. Because that consciousness being attached to this existence and not to the true reality is going to vanish as this phenomenon of space and time also vanishes. So the microcosm that has all the experiences of the previous lives of the microcosm itself is attracted again to our reality, and symbolically speaking, dives in it, receiving another form of life, another consciousness, another human soul, another personality in it. And as we said, this fourfold personality begins when we are born, and we receive from our parents our physical body. So the moment that we are born, even if we are fragile, even if we are totally unprotected, our physical body becomes independent from our parents. It has to be supported by them, but it's an independent life. And that cycle of life will continue to manifest itself when we grow a little bit, and varying a lot from one person to another. To some children, it happens at the age of 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years old. The second body becomes independent. That is the etheric body. And then the child starts to live out of his or her own energetic body or energetic essence. And it becomes independent from the parents or the family or from the people that support the child. That is why, for example, all the growth cycles, they change in our second childhood. That's also some diseases appear here when the etheric body starts to function independently from the body of the parents. But our growth process continues, and then our astral body becomes independent, normally around our puberty. And our puberty is that period that is not only defined by a storm of hormones, right? But it's also the time where all the heritage, all the karmic heritage of the microcosm becomes connected to the centers or to the organs of the astral body. And then it starts to flow through our consciousness and starts to drive our consciousness. And it's not a coincidence. And maybe that didn't happen to you, but when you became a teenager, all of a sudden your parents or your family looked at you and said, "Who are you?" one day, right? Where do you come from? Are you my son, or are you my daughter? Or why are you acting this way? And that happens because at that moment we become aware, or at least we inherit, not only all the biological treasure from our families, but the karmic treasures of the experiences of the microcosm that we live in. And that is what is really driving us, just like those undercurrents of that iceberg. In that moment, we truly become an individual, isn't it? We have our own will, our own desires. We know exactly what's driving us, or we don't know exactly what's driving us, but we are being driven anyway, right? So we continue then, and the fourth body becomes independent, more or less around the time that our society recognizes ourselves as an independent citizen, right? A self-responsible citizen. Then, when all our four bodies, physical, etheric, astral, and mental body, become independent, our threefold consciousness becomes fully concentric with those four bodies. And then we look at ourselves in the mirror, and we are going to say that probably until the very last day of our lives. This is me. I think this, I believe in that, I feel this, I have this kind of reactions, etc., and I am the captain of my life, right? Just like that captain with a paddle, more or less. And we are going to live a very long and productive life. Hopefully 70, 80, 90, luckily more than 100 years, right? But we gradually approach that moment that is never going to happen to us. It's always to our neighbor, right? We are all immortals, right? We don't die. Someone else is going to die. I'm not going to die, right? But eventually we do. And when we die, what happens is that we leave in this frontier of perception, because it's only the veil of a perception that separates us from the continuation of our existence. So we leave our physical body and the more dense part of the etheric body that we mentioned before. But the more subtle part of the etheric body continues with the other two ones. So our existence continues with the mental body, the astral body, and the more subtle part of the etheric body. In the moment that this happens, there is a true separation And universal teaching says that, the silver cord, right, breaks up. And it breaks up in the very point of attachment between our subtle bodies and the physical body, that in the East was called Qi. That's why you have all those names with Qi, right? You have Tai Chi Chuan, you have Hara Chiri, right? Because you are severing that very point in you. When that happens, and many, many people that have had that near-death experience have testified about it, they left their physical bodies for a couple of hours or moments, and then they came back again. And what do they describe? They describe, a focus of light, a light in a tunnel. It's nothing more than their own astral field. The focus of their consciousness and the surrounding area. And they also describe several experiences of their lives that they see, sometimes in part, sometimes they see all their lives, depending on how much they remain on that near-death situation. What is that? That is the silver cord, turning again. And it turns from the end to the beginning. And this is actually what happens with us when we see and we live again all our experiences. It happens also when the etheric body vanishes or volatilizes, right? Then we not only see what we lived, but we feel what we lived and what we have caused in others. Doesn't this sound to you a little bit like those descriptions of hell, heaven, purgatory, all those things? Why is it? Because all those fields are one and the same. And they all belong to the afterlife here. And it's not a separation of hell, heaven, purgatory. No. That's just your own reaction to what you have done throughout your life. And you are living that again. And there are no mythical beings, there are no celestial beings or other beings commanding this. It's actually a phenomenon of the continuation of life. And it happens when the etheric body vanishes. When the astral body vanishes, then not only you realize what you've done and what you've caused, but you feel it again. You feel what others have felt because of you. And then in the end, also, the mental body vanishes. And when the mental body vanishes, we live again the true motives of our life. The true driving forces that were behind us all the time. And we understand the root causes of our behavior, of our state of consciousness and everything. And in the moment, dear friends, that the fourfold chariot or the four vehicles of the consciousness, they vanish, then just like a flame, the flame of a candle, when the candle extinguishes itself, the flame also vanishes. And that's the flame of our consciousness, the flame of our soul. It is extinguished with the vehicles. Symbolically speaking, that moment is the moment when the soul drinks that drop of the river of oblivion, the lattice river. And then what remains, once again, is the microcosm, the true self, without an awareness, without a consciousness, and without the manifestations, without the personality. Then everything that was lived that is already recorded in the magnetic spheres of the microcosm. And the way it is recorded, dear friends, is a very, very sophisticated way. You know, our current systems of recording information with magnetic devices, you know, they are a pale shadow of the true nature of this recording here. It is like a multi-dimensional hologram that can be active again in the glimpse of the touch of the consciousness. And those experiences that are recorded here in the microcosm are going to drive the next existence of the microcosm and are going to define the situation of this microcosm in the following life of the microcosm, not of the personality. That is why it's also nonsense to complain or to be frustrated or not to accept what we normally call fate, that are the external situations and conditions of our lives, because it is a magnetic law of attraction that has pulled this microcosm into that very situation. But what's important here is that this life, the life that we know, this part here, actually exists only once. And is going to vanish just like the wave in the sea. And sometimes what we believe are memories or images of previous lives that we supposedly have lived are merely the experiences that are recorded in the microcosm that we can access in a forced way with some exercises and practices. But dear friends, just the same way that in an astral trip, the only thing that we are going to see and the only beings that we are going to see are the reflection of our own consciousness. They don't truly necessarily exist that way. Also, the supposedly lived experiences of previous lives are going to be seen through the lens of our egocentric consciousness. And all those faces, those situations, and everything are actually just a mirror of your own awareness. They don't truly reflect past lives. And we live that way, believing that we are immortal, believing that we are going to have access to eternal life, etc. And we are actually postponing all the true decisions that we must take to actually change the course of our lives, living in a dream that we are going to live forever. And in the meantime, the true prisoner is bound to this wheel, to the wheel of samsara, to the wheel of life and death, indefinitely. Because, dear friends, this is not evolution. We are not getting better with reincarnations. In the first place, because we don't reincarnate. But the microcosm is not getting better. There is no good karma or bad karma. There's just karma. Because karma is coiled time. It's an experience that has not reached its synthesis. It has not reached its maturity point. And this microcosm is going to be bound to this forever. Life after life after life. Until something fundamentally different happens here. So we are not evolving, we are not becoming better through this wheel until we reach a point of perfection, because we got perfected by the countless reincarnations. So for example, what other traditions they indicate symbolically, like the cycle of reincarnations, of the 777 reincarnations. They are not a number of reincarnations. They mean that in the threefold consciousness, 7 new forces must be awakened to transform it into something totally different. Until then, we are going to live just like that guy in the movie. It's an old movie, but it's very, very interesting. I think it's spelled the Groundhog Day. Yeah. Day after day after day, the same day. The very same day, the very same experiences, repetitive experiences. Until the point that the consciousness realizes that if it doesn't change fundamentally, not that it becomes better, that it treats those people better, that it manipulates those persons, no, to obtain a better result. You saw there, it doesn't work. So until there's a fundamental transformation, this is a prison, not the wheel of evolution. Period. And by the way, time stops here. People say, we are in the Kali Yuga, and after a certain period, we are going to overcome it. Sorry to tell you, time stops in the Kali Yuga. There's no automatic ascending pace of the evolution. There must be a fundamental transformation that creates an insight here. Something totally different. That totally different thing is the universal path that has been put in front of the human beings since the dawn of times. And it has always been the same path. We hear about that path through different traditions, through their symbols and myths. And we only have the shadow of that path. But the original teaching, the original source, always began with this. It never tried to develop this or to give special powers or special capacities to this being. Regardless if they are focused on hidden senses or, abilities or mystical abilities or magical capabilities. By awakening the Kundalini or through the concentration of the thinking, it doesn't matter. This is just trying to transform this caterpillar here in a caterpillar with wings. Instead of going through the process of a true transformation that is dissolving all those structures and allowing them to become the raw material of something totally new. That means going through the inner transformation, that is the cocoon, so that the true being, the butterfly, can manifest itself. So now we would like to talk a little bit about this path. The path of yesterday, of today, and of tomorrow, because it's actually just one. And as nothing is perfect, this is going to be a little bit lower. We hope that you can see it, right? So everything has the beginning, or must start, with the self. Because when we truly know ourselves, or the self in us, then the rest should be a consequence. But we have to tell you, frankly, that no power, no attempt, no method, nothing utilized by this being can awaken this center. Time cannot awaken eternity. It is eternity that must awaken in time.
It is the other way around. And this principle can become awakened after countless and countless repetitive lives, not as an evolution cycle, but almost like, frustration, exhaustion cycle, where these experiences become like a thick, thick layer, just like a thick cloud in the sky, so that the center of the consciousness becomes totally concentric with this center, and then a resonance phenomenon can happen. Then this center awakens. Then the rose, the lotus, the Atman, the mustard seed, the spirit spark atom awakens. The rose of the heart awakens. And with this force, there's the possibility of transforming the three centers of our awareness. In the first place, through the resonance between the center of our identity in our hearts with that center that is absolutely concentric with it. Then our hearts become like a resonance box of this sound without sound, that was described by Madame Blavatsky as the voice of the silence. This is the voice of the other one in us. And when this voice awakens, then our awareness can gradually be transformed. And a new self-awareness, a new self-knowledge can start to blossom. Just like the first petal of a rose that starts to blossom. And this center of awareness, united to this new awakened center of our true identity, can then start to transform our lives. You see the spiral? You see the rose in front of you? Opening up, blossoming, transforming the cross of the life of our personality through the unification of the spirit and the consciousness, the spirit and the soul. And through this transformation, you can then understand what can happen with the fourfold personality. A totally new organic process may take place. Not as if someone else was going to be manifested in you, no. But it is symbolically speaking, and that is why it was chosen that way, this symbol. Just like being born again. That is why it is said in the symbolic myths of the Christian traditions that if you are not born again, you will not be able to merge or to unite yourself with the true source of life. It is not an external experience. It's not believing in dogma. No, it is what? The true source, the spirit, united with the consciousness again, with the soul that can transform the body or the manifestation. And that starts, let me see if I can hold both now. That starts with the mental aspect, the astral aspect, and the etheric aspect. That can then free our being from this material prison and allow us to live this life in the cocoon of our bodies, right? With a totally different state of life. In the tradition of old India, they would say that when Atman is awakened. The new consciousness, Buddhi, can then become united with Atman, and then you have Atman Buddhi. And through the unification of Atman Buddhi, you have the rebirth of the higher mind, of the true thinker, of Manas, the true superior mental body. And this higher triad can then transform the lower square, the four vehicles: the mental body, the astral body, the etheric body, and the material body. Kama Manas, the mind that is dominated by desire. The desire itself, the astral body, Kama. The higher part of the etheric body, Prana, that can then transform Linga, and then the material body that I forgot the name. My Sanskrit is not 100%. So then you have the fourfold personality transfigured, or in modern terms, because transfiguration is the traditional description of this process brought by the spiritual school of the Golden Rosycross. But if we were to describe it today, it would be a repolarization of our energies and the changes of our atoms and everything, through the connection with this new, true, higher dimension in us. And that is why, dear friends, and we would like once again to finish with this synthesis that is the symbol of the school. And the school has chosen this symbol, and by the way, the symbol does not belong to the school. If you travel to Cusco in Peru, for example, you're going to see this very same symbol that was drawn by the Incas more than 1,000 years ago. The very same. Okay, and if you look to some Rosicrucian documents of the Middle Ages and of the 18th century, okay, you're going to see the same symbol. And in some old churches in Germany, etc., you're going to see the same symbol. Why? Because this brings a principle. This describes a process. And this process is when the true self awakens in us. When the spirit is manifested. Then the triangle of our awareness or our soul can be balanced and work in harmony with the spirit. So this is the rebirth of the soul. This is the true spirit soul or soul spirit. And those two forces can then transform the four aspects of our manifestation. What we think, what we feel, what we sense, and what we are. And when everything, all that manifestation, all the forces of nature, all the gods, right, are understood or transformed or integrated by the true self, then the cycle of life, symbolically speaking, the universe or the microcosm, the boundless sphere, can then become again integrated with the human reality. And then there is no separation anymore. There is no this life and the original life. There's only one life that manifests as one. This path, dear friends, may sound like a theory, may sound something distant from us, especially if we look at our lives and at who we truly are. But what we need to tell you is that this path is not an idea. This path is not an ideal. This path is not a theory. This path is the true possibility of fulfillment of the true objective of our lives as human beings. And it is open right now in front of us, just as it was open in the past. just as it will be open in the future. Because, quite honestly, future and past are mere illusions, because the only thing that actually and truly exists is this moment. And in this moment, everything that we have mentioned is absolutely reality, and it is possible. So with that, we'd like to conclude this not so short introduction. We thank you very much for your kindness and your attention in participating in this. We'd like to conclude this part now and open to your questions, your comments that we would like to address within our limitations. So the word is yours. Please.
So it's a school, and so like to attend courses to study for teaching
Okay. So I'll just try to repeat your question to make sure that everybody hears it and that I also understand it.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're saying, you said that this is a school. So how do we actually learn it? Do we have courses?
Yeah.
Right? Okay. Well, it is a quite particular approach for learning. Obviously, we have the books of the school, we have the writings of the school, we have the texts of the school, right? And this public talk is just speaking about the path. The school itself is going the path. It is, not speaking about those things, but actually living them. And that's where we also must understand as pupils of the school that everything that we receive as information, even if we are pupils of the school, right, is merely a bridge of recognition between that reality and our own consciousness. So the true process of learning of a pupil of a school, of a spiritual school, today, in the past, and in the future, right, is always self-discovery. You receive, these principles, you are, put in front of them, but it is the work of the human consciousness, it is the work of the human soul that is actually going to make everything possible or not. Just one example. Okay? The school today doesn't use the approach of the Pythagorean school of the past. It is said, okay, that they would receive a new pupil and give them just geometric shapes and some formulas and tell that person to remain in silence for at least 2 to 3 years. Right? We don't do that anymore. I think life has changed a lot, right? So the approach of the school is really an inner work, but an intense exchange of experiences between the pupils. So that this process of self-discovery that is unique, but at the same time is common to all human beings, can be shared and multiplied. And this multiplication is the true, let's say, impersonal help that a school can bring. Because a school cannot bring an external master, a true school. Otherwise, you're going to be worshipping a different authority. You just change the name and the address of the authority, right? And it doesn't work. So, a school has to help impersonally. And this exchange of experiences and exchange of way of living is what forms this, in modern terms, this information field This field where, you know, all the consciousness are working in one given direction, and that, you know, the effort of one can be multiplied as the effort of all. But this is all a school can do. Beyond that, it's really the work of the person, himself or herself. Okay, please.
Thank you for this talk. This was really interesting. I'm an environmental activist, so I'm curious how the Rosicrucian pupil will, so my perception of the world right now is that there's overpopulation, environmental issues, levels, and, you know, in terms of the values of the society that we're experiencing here as a collective, how do you see that as a pupil? Like, what is the purpose of a pupil? How to deal with this energy that you're actually experiencing in everyday life?
So I'll try to repeat your question so everybody hears. You are an environmentalist, right? And you like to understand how the school looks at the problem of the environment and, you know, to this world and the way that we live and the consequences of the way that we live, right? More or less like this, yes. Okay, well, there is one axiom or a formula in the universal teaching that says that state of consciousness is state of life. And we recognize that our state of consciousness is an egocentric state of consciousness. Buddha would describe this as attachment. So the source of pain or suffering, as Buddha would say, is the attachment of the consciousness to its manifestations or vehicles or veils. Right? We are more or less like a baby that doesn't understand the difference between its own little body and the clothes and the cradle and everything. So we still have a very young self-awareness. And we are identified with our thoughts and our feelings, etc. And because of that identification, we are egocentric. Theoretically, we are not geocentric anymore. We are heliocentric or galactic-centric, whatever, right? But in our day-to-day lives, we are egocentric. And the results that we see in the world are a consequence of this state of consciousness. So we look at nature and we treat nature as a slave. In the same way that we pollute nature, we pollute the mental sphere of the earth and the astral sphere of the earth and the etheric sphere of the earth, just like the material one. Because we are polluting ourselves in the first place. And it's a very, valuable and important initiative for the human beings and society to try to become, let's say, I'll use this term a little bit freely without a very technical definition, if you allow me, but to become a sustainable society with a sustainable environment. This is all very important, of course. We, as pupils, as responsible citizens, we support everything that goes in that direction, of course. But we also realize that in the first place, if we don't go through a true revolution and eliminate the unsustainability of our existence, the result is always going to be an unsustainable state of collective life. So I think that a spiritual school brings this sustainability issue to the core when it says to its pupils, if you really want to change the world, start changing yourself. And then you can become a catalyst of a global change. It is more or less like that nice example. They say it was Gandhi, right? That the mother needed to tell her child to stop eating sugar. And she asked for the help of Gandhi, right? And Gandhi scratched his head, not his hair, right? And he replied back to the mother, said, come back in 1 month. And then the mother came back. And then he said, now I'm prepared to talk to your child. Come here. Then he spoke to the child alone. And then eventually the child changed his mind or her mind about sugar. But the mother was curious, and she said, why did you ask me for a month? He said, well, I had to stop eating sugar in the first place. So that's more or less our approach. If we want to point the finger to someone else, we must be absolutely sure that we have pointed all the fingers to us in the first place. So I don't know if I helped you. Please.
They say when you point one finger, somebody has three.
Yeah, at least, right? And they say that the three fingers are these.
Oh.
And these are the three criteria of Socrates before you say something to someone else. If it's true, if it helps, and the third one I forgot. So, please.
All right. So
You had a question?
Yeah. So you're saying about this whole cycle and that finding our truest self aside from all outward manifestations through body, mind, emotions. What then, though? Once you do find that truest self, what then? What happens? Like, do you still need to reincarnate? Like, what happens in your life once you've reached that point, that deep point, that fundamental change that you're talking about that could change everything?
That's a great question. So your question is, after that principle is awakened, what then, right? Okay. You know why this is a great question? Because since we are born, especially we in the West, right, in the Western civilization, we are raised to do something. We are trained to act. We are trained to transform. We are trained to tackle problems and try to address them, try to solve them, which is great. It's absolutely great. And this is one of the pillars that has allowed the Western civilization to reach this point of development. That's fantastic. But at the same point, it's also a very big trap. Why? Because we are trained to use all the capacities and all the capabilities of this construction here. And this construction here, when it is touched by this principle, the first reaction, and this is unavoidable, it happens to absolutely everybody, will be just like that funny character of the past. We like to quote it because it's really funny. It's the Baron of Munchausen. He's that guy that tries to pull himself out of the morgue by his own hair, right? So, what is the effort of a pupil in the path? In essence, that's your question. If I realize theoretically that I'm not my thoughts, and I'm not my feelings, and I'm not my reactions, what am I going to do? What am I going to think? What am I going to feel? Right? Well, the effort is to who you truly are by doing something that is totally counterintuitive in the first place. But it's an amazing effort. The effort to only observe yourself in the beginning and try to do nothing. Don't judge. Don't try to change. And don't try to fake. not to somebody else, but to yourself. And what is the purpose of that? And what is the meaning or the use of that? In the beginning, we are just like in a dark room. We don't see anything inside our inner room. We merely react. We have an impulse. We do something. We react to somebody. Right? Then we feel the consequences of what we've done. And then we rationalize something to explain why we've done it. Isn't that so? I mean, for the most part, I mean, we are in exchanging with other people in a super high speed reaction mode. We realize to a certain point what is going on, and we are always rationalizing with that second voice of our thoughts in our heads. We are not even aware of that, but that's what's happening with us. And this is not your consciousness. This is just those automatic forces of quote-unquote nature, the astral forces, the etheric forces, the mental forces, the elementals of nature that circulate all around you, that dominate you totally. And how can you try to change yourself if you're not even aware of what is driving you and controlling you? So the first step and the first effort of the pupil in the path is to regain awareness, regain self-awareness through the effort of observing. And not through an effort of observing to try to influence, because this would be a psychological process of trying to balance yourself again. And this is just another attempt of solving the problem with the problem itself. But as Einstein would say, to solve a problem that was created in one state of consciousness, you must start from another state of consciousness. Otherwise, you don't solve it. And this is the other state of consciousness that you must use. That in the beginning is just like a thunderstorm, magnetic thunderstorm in your heart. That pulls you in every single direction. But what it's doing to you, it's showing you the forces that are driving you. The forces that are hitting you in that dark room. But if you use the torch of this new awareness to try to see, to perceive by yourself who you truly are and what's truly happening in you, those phenomena are going to become gradually more and more visible to your consciousness. And the power that they exert on you, because you are becoming aware, will diminish. Until the point that you will have built around your consciousness, symbolically, a space of freedom, a space where true free will can again be used. So those are the initial degrees or the initial layers of the path. But they don't go away. You don't become a master of self-knowledge and all of a sudden you do something else. It's just like building a pyramid. For a pyramid to have its perfect shape, for it to grow up, the basis has to become larger. So that's why self-knowledge, that is the first step on the original universal path, can only grow bigger and deeper. Because that will be the larger and stronger base for the further transformation that should come. That we have described like this. Okay?
Thank you.
Please.
I have a question. I'm not too sure how to phrase the question, but I'll try.
Just do it.
It's something I'm trying to discover. Let me start by saying it seems as though society changes as time goes on in terms of what it believes, its standards, its values, etc. The question is there a collective consciousness or vibration that somehow interferes, for want of a better word, with your free will? I think that's the simplest way I could put it.
Fantastic. And an honest answer should be yes and no.
That means maybe.
Yes, in the sense that this process here is not lived in a vacuum. We are truly living in one single microcosm, each one of us. And in that sense, every man or every human being is an island. But we are living as an archipelago, right? And one island is interacting with the other. And all the forces that are circulating here are influencing each one of us, just like one cell of the body is influencing the other cell in the body, and the collective of the cells of the body are exerting an influence on that particular cell. But the process of change is not done from top down. It's just like healing a disease. You don't heal the whole body first. You heal one cell. And that cell heals another and another and another and another. It is just like that old story of the dike and the boy in the dike, right? Just a small crack in the dike may crack the whole thing. So we were talking about a change in society, as you were describing, right? A human consciousness that becomes aware of this, theoretically, that tries to put that in practice, but above all, eventually accomplishes it or doesn't, becomes a true crack in the dike, becomes a catalyst of a change. And just like you don't need a lot of yeast to transform the dough, right, to make bread, just a small part of it must be active. This is what must happen in this world. If we want a true change in society, in mankind, we must become those catalysts. Because time is a very strange phenomenon. We are sensing acceleration in our society because we don't feel a big disruption for many, many decades. Eventually, since the end of the Second World War for the Western civilizations. Yes, we had wars, etc., tough ones, but we are living a continuum, right? And just like the spirals of life that grow on that golden proportion, right? The same is happening with our society. And if we plot those cycles of life, we are going to find something like this. We are living this moment. And this is why this moment is so important, because countless human beings are becoming self-aware and are becoming touched by that principle that was awakened. And those countless human beings are being confronted, maybe for the first time in their lives, with the possibility of choosing, of starting a true new time, not a repetitive cycle of games of power in the economy, in society, in politics, and blah, 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 blah. But truly becoming something new and being something new. And that's what it's all about.
You know, I really like the concept of duality.
Duality.
Yes, the idea of the Chinese call like a yin yang, and embracing the yang as much as the yin. So these concepts that may seem like darker emotions, sadness, anger, loneliness, sometimes even selfishness. But it seems like you're implying a little bit that when we reach this level of Atman, we have less of these,
No.
No.
No,
It's
no, no.
originality in some way, because I think that would make the life, I don't know, somewhat.
Well, boring in the first place, but yeah. Repeat the question. So your question was that you like this duality concept of yin-yang, but you see value in dark emotions just like in bright emotions, let me put it that way. So sadness and all other spectrum of that, okay? And it was your impression that going through this path we get rid of sorrow and we only become joyful, right? And you say, well, is this right? Okay. Well, it is a very important question because it's actually not eliminating bad to become good. It's not eliminating duality. Actually, this is alchemy. And alchemy is made of the synthesis of nigredo, the dark raw materials of our unconscious, and albedo, that is a new consciousness that is able to work on them. So by working together and deciphering the true meaning of everything that we call bad, why? Because they bother us, right? But they are the raw materials of our transformation, of our inner alchemy. And when those two are not only accepted, but they are integrated again, when those two are integrated, then the alchemy of the metals, of the elements begin. And that's when the precipitation of the red gold begins, rubedo. Rubedo means red gold. What is red gold? Gold, the spirit. Red is blood. So the spirit circulates in our blood again. Not as a theory, but in our reality. And when that happens, then everything that we call good and we call bad, the frontier between them vanishes. And we realize that everything is one. And what divided the world was not the world itself. What divided the world between good and evil was our point of view, our egocentric point of view. That is why we cannot find integration even with the highest and loftiest concepts if we remain in that state of consciousness. Take the highest concept that a man or a person can think of, God, right? That concept has caused the biggest amount of deaths and slaughters in history. Why? Because it was applied with an egocentric point of view. So what is good and what is bad? It is the egocentric point of view that divides the world. Actually, nature, the essence, everything is one. And the segregation between good and evil is in us. We must conquer ourselves. We must overcome ourselves through a true process of alchemy. That's why we said in the beginning that this was a synthesis of the Hermetic, Gnostic, Christian, Buddhist, Taoist, universal teaching, because that's the essence of that knowledge. Thank you. Any other question? Time? No. Question.
Just a historical context of, I mean, everything you're saying resonates, but I'm curious where did all of this Rosicrucian philosophy, where did it originate?
Mm-hmm.
It started at
Yes. Okay. The first, the question is, and dear friends, this is going to be the last question in this format because we are approaching 2 hours. Time flies. Yeah. And after that, we are going to give you some, important information about the school. And after that, we are going to remain here with the other pupils that live in this area. to give you more information about the school, or eventually to continue to address your questions. Okay. So, so what is the origin of the Rosicrucian or the Rosicrucian philosophy, etc., or the idea of Rosicrucianism? The first mentions of that idea, they date back to the 13th century in the Middle Ages in Europe, especially in Germany. And they relate to a person called A.C.R.C. or Christian Rosycross. Historically, he was the founder of the order of the Rosicrucian. He had a Christian background, of course, and he created this order that had the objective of putting in practice all the symbols of Christianity through a true initiation path. And that's why they have chosen that symbol of merging the two realities, the lower self, our ego that must be demolished and transformed, and the true self, the cross and the rose. So that movement was a very small group at that time. Eventually, that group grew to a bigger number. They say that 3 in the beginning, then 7 and 8 in the 17th century in Germany. And that group, it is said that they are the authors of the Rosicrucian manifestos that had a big influence in the thinking of that time. And the manifestos are the Alchemical Wedding, the Fama Fraternitatis, and the Confessio Fraternitatis. Okay? And after that, you had those undercurrents of Rosicrucianism, coming up again. This may sound a bit surprising, through Blavatsky, that before trying to found the Theosophical Order, Theosophical Society, here in New York in 1875, the original name of that society was the Rosicrucian Society. One of her disciples, that is Rudolf Steiner, later on took again the quote-unquote myth of Christian Rosycross and tried to explain it again as the true prototype of the original human being, of the original process of reunification with the true self. That's why, for example, you can look at the name of Christian Rosycross as, with the initials, as A.C.R.C. In Kabbalistic terms, you have 1393. If you sum it up, it's 7. And 7 is the number of the perfect spirit, the perfect man, right? So that's a prototype. Later on, Max Heindel took his teachings forward here in the States. So he founded the Rosicrucian Fellowship in Oceanside in California, and they're still active there. And they have their sanctuary that it is more or less the same archetype as Christian Rosycross, but they call it the Temple of Mount Ecclesia, or the Mount of Healing. Right? And it's a very beautiful place, close to Los Angeles. And later on in Holland, two brothers that belonged to the Rosicrucian Fellowship, they have founded the Rosicrucian, the Golden Rosycross school, that have tried to take all those teachings, the manifestos, the teachings of Christian Rosycross, the original teachings of the Theosophical Society, anthropology, anthroposophy, and the Rosicrucian Fellowship, and put it all together in a modern process that could manifest a mystery school, an initiation school, not only a preparatory school or an animistic school, but a true spiritual school. So, in essence, in a nutshell, that's it. So, some information. We believe that most of you came through Facebook, right? So, in that page, the Golden Rosycross, you find, some videos with similar content to this. You find information about the public work, and you find some other links to the website of the school, to YouTube, where we have the same content available to you. So you can link yourself to Facebook or through the website or in YouTube, always using that address of Golden Rosycross, and you're going to have access to that kind of material. You can also have access to the books of the school. Some of the more recent ones that we call magazines, you can download the summary of those magazines in our website, goldenrosycross.org, right? But you can also acquire some of the books of the school through Amazon. You just type Golden Rosycross, and you're going to see several titles of the school there. You can also participate in meetings like this. The group of New York that is linked to the conference center that is located in Chatham, that is New York State, upstate. They organize monthly meetings like this, okay? And if you leave your address or if you link yourself to the Facebook page, you're going to have access to those dates. And they're similar meetings to this, and they take fundamental aspects of the school and they discuss that, and then they open for questions and answers. And for those that, after having been in contact with the teachings of the school, have recognized those teachings as something that is valid for their inner process, and that creates a recognition, it's not a matter of knowledge, external knowledge, then the school is open for those persons that want to know more about the school with activities in our conference center or other activities that are going to be organized in this following coming months. So if the pupils that live here in the area could just stand up or raise their hands so that everybody that is visiting us could liaise back to them. So they have all the information, so before you leave, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask. And the next public conference that we are going to have in this format, or a public talk, is going to be in the month of September after the summer vacations. Okay? So thank you very much for your attention and participation.